So when I was growing up, other than Burning Daylight, one of my favorite books was a collection of Aesop's fables. And there were two fables I especially liked. The first was the ants and the grasshopper. One day during the heat of the summer, a group of worker ants is carrying buds of wheat past the local grasshopper. And the grasshopper, looking curious, asked the ants, "What's that you got there?" "It's wheat," says the ants. "We're saving up food for the autumn. What are you doing to prepare?" The grasshopper scoffs. "Prepare? No need to worry about that right now. I'm enjoying my summer by making music and playing my violin." As the ants continue carrying their wheat, the grasshopper just continues playing his instrument, soaking in the summer sun. But once the summer ends and the autumn arrives, the worker ants excitedly take out the wheat they had harvested and they begin sharing a meal. While doing so, the grasshopper suddenly appears looking pretty glum. "Ants, will you help me? I have no food to eat," he says. The ants couldn't help but ask, "What happened to your food stock?" The grasshopper whines, "I didn't have time to store up any food. I was so busy making music that before I knew it, the summer was gone." The ants shrugged their shoulders in disgust. "Making music, were you? Very well, now dance." And the ants turned their backs on the grasshopper and went on with their meal. So as a kid, what did I learn from that? Well, ants work hard, but they're not very compassionate people. They're ants, after all. And grasshoppers aren't very good at planning ahead, but they are awesome musicians. In my Aesop's Fables book, of course, it actually said the lesson of this story was, work hard and be responsible for yourself. The motto of libertarians everywhere. My other favorite, and probably the most famous of Aesop's fables, is The Tortoise and the Hare. So, one day, the hare mocks the tortoise for its slow speed. "Do you even get anywhere going that slow?" The tortoise retorts, "Why, yes, I do. In fact, I'm quicker than you think. Let's race, and you'll see." Thoroughly amused, the hare agrees. They settle on a starting point and an end point, and the race is on. The hare quickly dashes away from sight as the tortoise begins to take its first few steps. To further humiliate the tortoise, the hare decides to take a break, not far from the finish line. But in doing so, the hare ends up falling asleep and is ultimately awakened by his nemesis, the tortoise, slowly but surely crossing the finish line and defeating the hare. And from that, I learned that hares are jerks and tortoises are really cool. Of course, the real moral to the story is, and we all know this, so say it with me, slow and steady wins the race. Very good. Now, it wasn't until years later when I was sitting in a college classroom that I was introduced to a brand new interpretation of those fables. It was an accounting class. We had an overwhelming amount of information. We were expected to learn every day and tons of homework. It was like my brain was breaking. I wasn't the only one feeling that way, though, because one day a fellow student raised his hand to ask if it was possible for the instructor to lighten up a little bit on the assignments. There were only so many hours in a day, the student said. And that's when the instructor decided to pass on some wisdom. He told us those two fables. And then he said, "Do you know the meaning of those stories?" So about the ants and the grasshopper fable, we all said, plan ahead. And about the tortoise and the hare story, we all said, slow and steady wins the race. The instructor said, wrong. They're both about time management. He said, we all have the same 24 hours in a day. It's what you do at that time that makes a difference. So that was a fascinating insight. The bad news was it meant he had absolutely no intention of lightening up on our assignments. Now, I don't know about you, but the COVID experience for me has often felt very disorienting. I think we all feel fatigued and maybe even trapped by this thing. To keep safe, our familiar holiday gatherings and rituals coming up will be very different and diminished this year. That's going to be hard. And the news is just depressing. It doesn't appear that we will be close to resuming any semblance of normal anytime soon. If anything, we may be facing stricter measures, and so many people are not only suffering from illness, fear, and loss, but also economic distress. Since May, it's been estimated that 8 million people have been forced into poverty, many of them black people and children. So it's much more than just disorienting. I'm extremely fortunate that I can still work and work from home. And to a large extent, I stay at home most of the time. I've reestablished a very close relationship with my dog. She either understands English much better than before, either that or I have learned dog, but we now have these long, meaningful talks. Anyway, we all like our routines and rhythms to life. And when COVID first hit, it didn't seem all that bad to put routines and rhythms on hold for a while in the interest of everyone staying healthy, right? We needed to be flexible. I can handle that. But as it started to sink in over this summer that we're going to be doing this for the long haul, something weird happened. And I know I'm not the only person who has felt this. You wake up and you can't quite remember what day of the week it is. Time has warped and folded back in on itself. The other day I heard someone say, yeah, back in March, last week or a million years ago, maybe time feels all out of whack because we have a collective sense of waiting for something to happen, that things feel out of our control, that we're like people stuck in an airport waiting to board a flight that keeps getting delayed hour after hour and day after day, but we can't leave the airport. We just wait. So to keep from feeling like I'm living an episode of The Twilight Zone, I've had to create a physical space at home that feels like I'm at work. And since the YMCA is closed, I have to imagine I am there every morning in order to do just a few push-ups on my bedroom floor. Even though I don't really need to, some days I get dressed up. I actually don't wear sweatpants on those days just to feel like I'm being a responsible adult. I've learned to set an alarm on my phone to tell me when to stop working. Otherwise, I'll look up and somehow it's already midnight and I've missed Chris Cuomo yet again. But my greatest concern in this time warp time is time itself. When routines are normal and when the world feels more normal, we sense time as a more steady flow, I think. It feels more purposeful and regulated. And now I find myself looking back on the past 8 months and feeling two things. One, I'm never going to get that time back. And two, what am I doing now to not feel that way when another 8 months of this has flown by? Now you might say, and I've said to myself, that I just need to be more disciplined and use my time more wisely, and then I wouldn't feel that way. If I was more like the ants and less like the grasshopper, if I was more like the tortoise and less like the hare, then everything would be all right. By the way, I know I'm making a huge assumption that you share any of these feelings at all. But based on my conversations with a lot of people, I know I am not alone. So what do we do about time management when time itself doesn't feel like it's playing by the rules? How can we be wiser in a time like this, or in any time? And this is not just a personal thing, of course, because it's obvious that we're all living through an incredibly transformative moment in time. We talk a lot about normal, but I don't believe we will ever be back to our previous version of normal. This year hasn't just altered how a lot of us go to work. We're dealing with and reimagining some of the core assumptions that our society has about itself. And I don't believe it's necessarily a divide between people who are conservative and liberal, however much it's portrayed that way. The pandemic simply became a convenient political vehicle to make those competing worldviews more stubbornly opposed than they already were. So instead of a public health emergency we could all rally ourselves around to fight and to employ the best common sense science and the huge resources we have to strive for the good of everyone, it's now our common cultural understanding that folks who are more conservative don't wear face masks or feel that doing so is an affront to their personal liberty. You can't tell me what to do. While those who are more liberal are only too happy to wear face masks and feel that doing so is simply being responsible. We really need to pull back from that and realize just how absurd it is that we even have that dynamic. I think we need a huge shift in perspective, and I am astounded it has not happened yet. You know, if we had 4 jetliners full of people being hijacked and crashing and killing everyone on board every day, which is roughly the daily COVID death toll, we would not think twice about coming together, being on the same page, and addressing this in a sane manner. People are still not wearing face masks or social distancing. The COVID experience is telling us a lot of things about ourselves as a culture and about who we are and what we value. And so is the national reckoning we've faced this year on race and how we're going to respond to that. By either continuing to believe it's not a real issue or doing the hard work of coming to terms with and correcting how we regard and treat so many of our neighbors. So is the weird irony that we have the world's largest economy, but the greatest income inequality of any Western developed nation. So is the strange notion that the climate crisis is not real, that you can't trust science, that our comfort and convenience and lifestyle today matters a whole lot more than the very lives of our children and grandchildren. I mean, that is sick. So when I talk about time management, I'm also thinking about what I can do, what we can do, each and every one of us in our own way, to use the 24 hours we have every day to actually behave like the responsible grown-up Christians we claim to be, and to work on this stuff together. Now, I get it. Our faith is a personal thing. It's a comfort. It's an inspiration. It's hope. But it's also not all about us. It's mostly not about us. The more I study and pray, the more I'm convinced that being a person of faith is a lot like being a boat. We are vessels. We're built to transport things. Now, we can be tied up safely next to the dock as the river rushes by, with us bobbing along in the water, going nowhere, waiting for something to happen, for things to be our ideal of normal again. But the thing is, there are people across the river on the other shore who desperately need us to deliver to them hope and peace and justice and understanding and wisdom and love, and they need it now. There are problems over there that can be addressed. There are divisions that we can bridge with our neighbors. There are partners we can work alongside. If only we row over there carrying our sacred cargo. Otherwise, we are not fulfilling the reason we were made. While the river of time flows on, if we don't take hold of this moment to cross it, we're just floating in place as if that's what we're made for. But we were made for greater things. Let's hear the words of the psalmist again to remind ourselves of that wisdom from 2,500 years ago. As for us, we eventually turn back to dust from whence we were made. 1,000 years in your sight, God, are like yesterday when it's past, or like a moment in the night. But our days are swept away like a dream, like grass that is renewed in the morning. In the morning it flourishes and is renewed, but in the evening it fades and withers. All our days roll past under your watch, and our years come to an end like a sigh. So teach us to count our days, that we may gain a wise heart. A wise heart. I like that for a time management motto, because a wise heart is one with the understanding that none of us is around forever, that time does flow quickly, that last March can feel like a week or a million years ago, that time itself these days is disorienting, and that events can feel like they're beyond our control. But if we ever tell ourselves we have no control, we're telling ourselves a lie. We have computers, we have the internet, we have telephones, we have brains, we have faith, we have voices, we have power to change our world for the better. We can call our members of Congress and tell them it is unacceptable to not pass a significant COVID relief bill when so many people are facing eviction from their homes and food insecurity. That would be a start. The thing is, we have the ability to get stuff done that really matters right now. And we will. This church will. I guarantee you that we will. We're not waiting on anything. We're already making a difference. Just check out all the stuff our Social Action Network is doing. We all have it within our power, and it is our calling to manage the time we have to truly live and serve others as God created us to do, as vessels of God's love.